It's gone 8:22 a.m. on this day of Friday. And this morning we kick off looking at an issue that is a burning issue in South Africa. Close on to 10 million children go hungry. And this morning we're talking with Sasha Stevenson, who is a lawyer at Section 27, which is a public interest law center, and it seeks to achieve substantive equality and social justice in South Africa. Sasha, good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yes, great having you with us, and we thank you for your time with us this morning. Now, Sasha, it's clear that 10 million or close to 10 million children that go hungry each day. This is a major cause for concern, and particularly coming out of a lockdown, and many of these children rely on being fed at schools, and with schools being closed, obviously this has been quite problematic.
That's right, yes. The schools are now back in a platooning or rotation system. And so what we've seen since we went to court earlier this year to try and ensure that the school nutrition program would recommence when learners return to school, what we've seen is an increase in feeding. So that of the 9.6 million learners who ordinarily receive food through the school nutrition program, we understand that 7.7 million learners are currently receiving food. But what we don't know is whether they're receiving food every day, because with the platooning system, they're not at school every day. And so not all provinces seem to have made a plan to ensure that learners will receive food even on the days or the weeks when they're not at home. And that's so important to deal with the issues that you raise of childhood nutrition and to make sure that learners are able to concentrate when they're at school.
Yes. Now, Sasha, if you could just take us back and just to understand why this matter had to go to court in the first place.
Yeah, so when the national lockdown happened and schools closed, the school nutrition program stopped entirely. And it meant that the 9.6 million learners who usually receive food just weren't receiving that meal. And some of the stories that we heard were really troubling, of learners who really do rely on that meal to have one nutritious full meal a day. And so there was a huge amount of suffering during shutdown. When the Department of Education decided to reopen the schools, it wasn't clear that they were going to restart the feeding program for everybody straight away. There was this intention to roll it out again and to do so slowly. And so Section 27 and the Equal Education Law Center represented Equal Education and some school governing bodies of schools in Limpopo to take the Department of Education nationally and in all the provinces to court to ensure that the school nutrition program would start again and would start for everybody. We won that case. The court decided that was the obligation of the state. And now there are reports that have to be filed at court every 15 days for the department to report on what they're doing and how many learners are now being fed. And that's how we know that 7.7 million learners are receiving food at the moment. What we don't know is if that's every day, including the days when they're not at school. And so what's urgent is for a plan to be made so that those learners who aren't at school every day are receiving meals every day.
Well, there are two issues here, Sasha, and from what you say, I hear you. We're talking on the issue of social justice, but also at the end of the day, there is a constitutional obligation on the part of the education authorities.
You're absolutely right, and that's what the court found. It found that the school nutrition program was both an attempt to realize the right of learners to basic nutrition, which is a right that's contained in the Constitution, and importantly, it formed a component of the right to basic education, just as teachers and textbooks and transport and desks have been found to do. And so this program, which is really an incredible program that's been going since the beginning of our democracy to feed learners in quintiles 1 to 3 schools, the poorest 60% of schools. The court found that program was realizing rights. And so the failure of the department to reinstate the program when lockdown ended was a violation of rights.
Now, Sasha, there's also with the schools open, and we know that most learners are back at school, but there are also learners who are not back at school and who have been part and parcel of this feeding scheme. What happens to those learners?
Well, that's the problem. In some provinces made a plan. So some provinces are sending home food parcels with learners who aren't at school, either because they've been excluded for whatever, not excluded, exempted for whatever reason, maybe because they're unwell or they're living with unwell family members, or because they're platooning. They're coming in some days and not coming in other days. So some provinces have made a plan to send home food parcels, to ensure that transport is available for learners to come to school. But it seems like not all provinces have done that, and it's quite difficult to disaggregate the data that we're receiving from the department. And so earlier this week, we wrote a letter to the department to ask for that disaggregated data so that we can understand whether those 7.7 million learners who are receiving food are receiving it every day, and how they're making sure that food is received. And then thirdly, what'll happen with the other approximately 2 million learners who still don't seem to be receiving food, and there's no real explanation for that.
Sasha, how are you and Section 27 monitoring the situation, monitoring the education departments, the Department of Basic Education, and also these provincial education departments?
We are conducting surveys of learners. So Equal Education has equalizers who are high school members of Equal Education in every province in the country. And these equalizers are monitoring their own schools and the schools in their community. And so a survey was conducted in the last week to ascertain what the story was and whether learners were in fact receiving food, so that we could assess what the department was saying against the experience of the learners. And what they found is that many of the learners who are, on days that they're not at school, are not receiving food. And that, as I say, is a huge concern. But we also encourage people to reach out to the organizations if they're having these issues, to let us know, because the court order required that the department reports to the court and to us every 15 days. And so if there are issues, there's an opportunity for us to raise those issues with the department to ensure that this feeding program starts again and is feeding all learners as it should be.
I think, Sasha, one of the biggest problems is the education department that has not been proactive. And this is what had actually prompted the court action, because surely they should have realized that with the lockdown, these children are not going to be coming to school. We should have fed them. And it does appear as if this is a matter that is not being taken serious enough.
Yeah, it is of concern. You know, you're right. It should have been very clear to the department. It was clear to us, and we made a number of attempts to engage with the department before going to court to ask what the plan was, you know, to ensure that, to ask whether the department in fact had taken steps to make sure that learners were being fed during this time. And what we found was quite a lot of obfuscation. There wasn't a lot of clarity from the department. And there seemed to be an assumption that the Department of Social Development and other food programs would be able to take care of the learners who were in trouble. But of course, the school nutrition program is the biggest provider of food, and it provides food directly to learners at school. It's such a great program. And so it was crazy, really, that it should be terminated during the lockdown, and then even crazier, and in fact, as the court found, unlawful, that it shouldn't have been restarted for all learners straight away. I think what's interesting about this case also is that there is dedicated funding for this school nutrition program that is allocated every year in a conditional grant. It can't go anywhere else. It can't be spent elsewhere. And so the problem isn't a money one. The problem is an implementation one. And so that's why we are pushing the department. Every 15 days when we receive their reports, we are assessing the situation from the ground, and we're responding to them to try and get this program started up again properly.
Sasha, are you concerned that these numbers are going to go up quite a bit from the 9.6 million that we already have, considering the devastation that has been caused by COVID-19 to the economy, to joblessness, to homelessness? So, we are definitely looking at a worsening situation.
So it does seem to be a worsening situation. What the NIDS CRAM survey, which was a nationally representative survey that was the second wave of which was released a week or so back, found is that child hunger has decreased in this period. So between the first wave was in April, and child hunger and adult hunger had skyrocketed. It's now decreased from those very, very high levels because many learners are now receiving meals at school and because the economy has opened a bit. But what we know is that it's still much higher than it was before lockdown. And as you say, the economic effects are still compounding, they're still increasing. And so there really is a big risk to children at this stage. And when we have a program like the school nutrition program, we have to use it to make sure we're reaching the most vulnerable learners so that they are not stunted in their growth physically or mentally, and that they're able to grasp the opportunities that await them at school.
Yes, and obviously this is something that needs to be monitored going forward, and particularly when we hear of talks of a second wave of the virus. So, God forbid if that does happen. But at the end of the day, it is something that one needs to be watchful of.
Absolutely.
Well, Sasha, thank you very much for that and for your time with us this morning. We wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sasha Stevenson joining us this morning on Salam Media, looking at the problems associated with kids and the nutritional program in the country. Mohammed, assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam, Inayet. Very quickly, before we